built to overcome. NASA couldn't overcome it in the 1980s, and we still haven't overcome it.
So if there was an issue on both sides of the mountain, they should be continuous monitoring at both locations?
No, that's not what I said. What I said was if you're trying to respond to a specific issue of concern, you probably want to be collecting data at that location.
But if you, I think I say, if the issue is at two locations, you'd have to do it at both, right?
It depends on what you're trying to address. Now, if there's something that's dramatically different between the two locations and one can reasonably serve as a surrogate for the other, distance being one or wind direction being another, then there may not be a requirement to do in-field work at both. But I think you have to understand that the technology of monitoring is good, but it's not perfect.
Anybody else want to respond to that?
Yes. Typically, when we set up monitoring programs, we try and look at representative locations. We recognize that we can't measure at every community location. Just, there's only a finite amount of money, period, that should be spent, as long as we can be assured that we're adequately characterizing both the background as well as the projects in a particular location. So I concur with Mark that we have to look at that and see if it makes sense to have a second location.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead.
On setting up the noise,
Say your name again, please.
Melody McLean. On setting up the noise monitoring equipment, I understand the theory behind not putting it near my home, for instance, because of the noise bouncing off the reflective surface of my home, correct? Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, can I just interrupt right there?
Yes.
Because I think I disagree with everybody here on this.
Okay.
And the reason I disagree is if the reflection is what you are living with
Exactly.
and
That was my,
experiencing,
yes.
that's what you should measure.
That's my point.
Because if it's a health standard and that is the level that you are experiencing, that is the measured level that should be measured.
Exactly. I'm
Now,
not
if you
living out in my
wanted to
garden
know-
in the
One at a
open.
time. You've got to do this one at a time
Okay.
because the reporter can't take you both. They can't do it. She's good, but she's not that good.
So if you wanted to know just what is coming out of the turbine with no reflections, then you would do it the way these guys would say. But if you wanted to know how the noise is affecting a real human being in their house, the reflection is a reasonable thing to do.
What do you think the maximum reflection can
The decibel level?
be? Yeah.
Oh, it's not going to be great. But
So you're talking about a maximum perfect reflection being 3 decibels.
yeah.
That's the threshold of a perceivable difference of like sounds, similar sounds. We don't deal with perfect reflections. So you're dealing with a reflection of 1 to 2, maybe?
Yeah, it depends on.
So you're on margins. So I understand what you're saying, but I think technically speaking, most other measurements and regulations are done in the free field environment. Now, if you don't want to do it that way, that's fine. But it's a small difference.
Others have their hands up. Yes, sir, back there. Yes.
Mark from Oregon.
Yeah.
Could you, and I might have missed it, who do you represent today?
Today, I was hired by Renewable Energy Vermont.
Okay, thank you. Secondly, I would
Could you state your name too while you're at it?
Kim Fried from Newark, Vermont. I'd also like to thank the full panel, but I'd also like to really thank the 2 people who are from Vermont, okay, with the most experience with the situation and the developments within Vermont itself. So thanks to everybody, special thanks to our Vermonters.
Nancy Freed, and I'm from Newark, Vermont. And I'm going back to the last question where you were saying you disagreed that if you're the one experiencing it, and that's always been a puzzle to me because I see the different news articles saying, well, at this site they were in compliance or at this house, and I've gone to visit people that are experiencing these noise situations, and all you have to do is go spend a little time there, and you'll see what it is. I mean, it drives you nuts. It's the constant, you couldn't live with it. And it doesn't take all this expert noise, you just need a site visit. You just need to go there.
As a matter of fact, if it makes you feel any better, I'm going to respond to this. I'm not one of the experts, but one of the reasons we did that is, and one of the reasons we're going up and talking to people at one of these workshops, we're going to aim at people that are actually affected by these and listen to them, is in fact to do that.
Good.
That's really one of the purposes that we opened this for. You know, when we first did these projects, they weren't on the ground.
Right.
And we were doing what we got, what we had, what we heard, and we were evaluating evidence that we had in front of us, all theory to us in a lot of ways, because high altitude wind turbines were something that we didn't deal with much. If you look at New York, they're almost all on the other, most of them are on the other side of the Adirondacks. Right. They're in valleys, and it's not the same animal.
Right. I think if you just go
And
spend
so
time.
one of the ideas is to take a look at this. If we have, in essence, if we have these and we have a laboratory, well, then let's use it as that and see what we've got here.
Thank you.
Ms. Smith?
Annette Smith. Following up on that, I not long ago had a chance to spend the night at Paul Bruha's house in Sheffield, which is 1.25 miles roughly east of the First Wind Sheffield turbines. And I found myself trying to understand what it was I was experiencing. And it wasn't just what I considered noise. It was this barometric pressure wave that was hitting the house, and I kept wanting to kind of put my head under the pillow or flee or something. And I came back and I started looking for visualizations that people have done that show what is happening to the air. And I wonder if any of you have those. For instance, for a ridgeline wind project, where we can see in a visual form what those pressure waves are that are coming off the turbines and how they are interacting with each other. And because to me it wasn't really noise that I could hear. It was this pressure that was hitting the house and sort of pressurizing the whole space. And it turns out that there are simulations, but I didn't find anything that. It was more about trying to determine the interference with each other's turbines. It wasn't about what's happening, a mile away. And do any of you have those that you could share with us?
So I believe what you're referring to is called wake effect, and the effect of air going over the blades and essentially causing a wake. And you're right, most of the studies, they do computational fluid dynamics to try to determine the interaction from one turbine to another, mostly for the purposes of ensuring that they're spaced far enough away that the other ones can still generate their rated power in a situation where they're in a wake from another turbine. There's images and videos, but from what I've seen, and again, we're mostly noise specialists, so we don't get involved into aerodynamic, computational fluid dynamics, at least I don't. But from a noise perspective, you can measure some effects of those individual pulses, but the question always becomes, in terms of relating it to human experience, what that means. It's inherent in the noise measurements there. Noise is a fluctuation in pressure. So if you look at fluctuations in a rate analogous to the turning of the turbine, the blade passage frequency, then you will see that in noise measurements if your measurement equipment is sensitive and accurate enough in those frequencies. So it's there, but in terms of effects on the house or the wind dynamics, that's not something that I have. I'm not sure if any of the other noise guys would have anything.
Do you have anything? Because I think it would be helpful to all of us we've been talking so much about a machine that you measure data with, but to actually be able to visualize what is happening to the air that's causing these homes to be bombarded with this pressure wave, I think it would be helpful. I mean, I can share with the board the things that I've found, but I think that it's a gap in the whole evaluation of what's happening with wind turbines to not create these simulations that show how the air is being pressurized and how it's affecting homes.
Do any of you understand that to be the case, that these pressure, the wake effects that you just discussed could travel away from the turbines for as much as a mile or more and affect a house?
I haven't done, or my firm hasn't done any analysis on wake effects from a fluid perspective. We have measured infrasound levels attributable to turbines, but the levels have been quite low inside people's houses. I haven't seen it in the literature either being measured or simulated that far down.
Have any of you spent, we had a couple of people mention it, and then I mentioned it as well, but have any of you, as you were dealing with this, actually spent time in a house or on a site where the complaint of low-level noise has been made? Have any of you spent a night there, slept there, listened to it? Have any of you done that? And what did you find if you did? And what did you find if you did? Yeah, low frequency.
So I've spent a lot of time on site. I haven't slept in someone's home that's complaining, but I've slept in the car close to someone's home that's complaining.
I've had to do that before too.
Yeah, so it's definitely measurable. It's there. And I just wanted to make a point of clarification. Low frequency sound is audible. It's part of the audible spectrum. And the contribution from the turbines are measurable. They're not something that is that different from any other type of low frequency noise. And I have been there, but I personally haven't experienced the symptoms that most complainers have, with the exception of a few complainers who basically said the noise annoys me. I can hear it in my house, I can hear it in my bedroom, and it annoys me. Which I could confirm that it definitely was audible, both inside and outside the home. And I mean, with the statement of annoyance, well, it's a completely subjective assessment.
And I think I'll just follow up in terms of, I'm not aware of studies that have really confirmed the pressurization of homes at a mile or that type of distance either. I also have spent the weekend with folks, they were not concerned, and they lived 1,300 feet downwind, and they really owned the turbines. But that was been my experience.
I've been to several residences that have been within, say, 1,500 feet to 2,000 feet from operating large-scale turbines. I haven't experienced the low frequency, and I could certainly hear in the mid-frequency range, the swoosh, swoosh, the characteristic sound. And the residents did, in both cases, share that this is the sound they're hearing. It may not be as loud as it usually is. Usually they say I should have been here last night. And at some point I would wish to have the opportunity to sort of calibrate myself to the same and witness the same conditions that my neighbors are saying, yes, it gets as bad as this, or almost as bad. I haven't had that experience yet for this source. I have for some other types of sources.
Yes, sir. Yellow shirt.
My name is Fred Person.
I'm sorry, what was the last name?
Person, P-E-R-S-O-N.
Thanks.
What I'm interested in is in the low frequency difference, measurable, is it measurable when they're not turning? Because it just seems like there could be a possibility of consistency of the low frequency when it's running and not running, because vibrations of frequency, has a lasting effect. And if there's going to be monitoring, I think you need to really put this into consideration of the longevity, and that's where I agree with the first guy, is a consistency of monitoring over a long period of time instead of sporadic or in short frequencies to, but I understand the money issues and the complications of what's going on too.
Some of the literature that I'm aware of has done some monitoring, and they looked at low frequencies indoors and outdoors, and they were monitoring the wind speed outside of the dwelling, and they found a greater correlation with the wind speed at the dwelling than with the turbine operations. So it was the low frequency noise that they were measuring in this instance was caused by how the structure was interacting with the wind, the local wind. It didn't necessarily have anything to do with the turbines. I'm not aware of anything along the lines of what you're suggesting.
The only thing I would add is in terms of getting a full picture and not just short snippets, I do agree that from a monitoring perspective, it's helpful if you can separate different operating conditions so that you can look at a specific condition and have enough of a sample of that specific condition to be able to say, I've captured most of what's going on for this wind speed, wind direction, power rating, what have you. That way you can be reasonably confident that whatever phenomena are happening are hopefully captured in your measurement campaign. Now, whether that happens over a 3-week time span or a 3-month time span, it's really about Mother Nature and what she does when the measurement campaigns are going on. So the measurements that we advocate always have a minimum number of sample sets for each wind beam so that you can make a statement or get a picture about what's happening, say at 4 meters a second for argument's sake, both with the turbine operating and without the turbine operating, and have a large enough sample to say most of the time it's here, some of the time it's here, some of the time it's there. And this is the picture with the turbine on, and this is the picture without. And it's not always nice and clear cut, but I am a proponent of having a large enough sample size to be able to make better judgments rather than very short duration handheld spot checks and say, look, I did one measurement, it shows 42, that means X, Y, Z. That's where it becomes dangerous.
Do any of the experts have questions for each other?
I've got a few.
Okay.
So, and more maybe in terms of comments, Les talked about the modeling and some of the challenges with the modeling, and I just want to make sure, you were at the Wind Turbine Noise Conference in Denver?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, so Cooper and Evans presented their work on the modeling in Australia and did their modeling assessments and really showed great correlation and great accuracy with the model. The Wind Turbine Noise book chapter by Andrew Bullmore also talks about how the model can be used and can be used accurately. The UK Institute of Acoustics recently published a best practice guide that talks about how the model should be used. They don't add compounding uncertainties on top of each other, but they do talk about how the model can be used and that when it is used here, it is reasonably accurate from an engineering perspective. So just wanted to point that out and make sure you were aware of that. We don't typically ask our models to be perfect 100% of the time. We also don't typically, when we look at other sources of sound, ask our models to predict every movement. When we do traffic noise, we don't predict every noise of every vehicle, we predict it in an aggregate. So if you want to do something different, then maybe that's, that there's some room to talk about. But I do think the models are reasonably good. And then I think the other thing we heard somebody talk about was, and I'm forgetting your name, Noreen. Talk about the 1980s research from DOE and NASA. That was of downwind turbines. That was of a prototype turbine that was scaled up. That infrasound and vibration was so substantial that it was vibrating the dust off of people's shelves. We haven't seen downwind turbines near anybody since. We're dealing with upwind turbines, and DOE and NASA obviously haven't felt the need to clarify anything on that because they believe the upwind, I would like to say that they believe the upwind turbines have resolved that that concern. So I think there has been some misunderstanding with regards to how the older research is applied. Even if you look at what Dr. Moeller from I'm forgetting, Alberg discusses, he's concerned about low frequency noise, but he indicates that the infrasound is nothing to be concerned about on modern turbines. So I think it certainly was an extensive research project, and Neil Kelly did some great work, and they developed some standards, and I think if we applied those standards today, we'd show that we actually comply with those standards. So I just want to make sure that it's clear that that is not talking about the current generation technology.
But the current generation technology, they're getting bigger, they're getting faster.
Can't hear.
I would just think that the current generation technology, though, they're getting bigger, they're getting faster, they're getting more forceful. And the infrasound is still an issue.
So the challenge with the infrasound generation mechanism was the downwind wake.
No, I understand
So,
that.
and that has gone away.
I understand that was the problem, and that was the problem that was solved by the 1985 study. But what I'm saying is one of the things they talked about in great detail was the issues with infrasound. And they dealt with the issues of infrasound. The turbine they were looking at was, what, 100 feet tall? We're talking about 500-foot turbines now. So the infrasound problem has come back up again, and people aren't addressing it. That's what I'm saying. I'm saying that we can't ignore infrasound.
I don't know that a lot of people agree with that, and Moeller being one of them.
Can I just hop in there real quick? I just want to respond that I don't have a problem with the modeling. All I am asking is that the board, when they assess it, the modeling, remember that it is based on a standard, and that standard, well, it's no longer on the screen, but it's in your handouts, has an accuracy range in it, and I think it should be taken into account because it's part of the standard. It's just that it isn't being presented by the developer.
The other thing that I would like to point out to the board is that...
Mr. Brock, could you just hang on a second?
Yes, sir.
Thanks. Just wait a second.
Hey, just in talking about the modeling, I think the board also needs to, or somebody that is doing a review of the application and the model needs to understand what the conditions are, because there are numerous different software switches within these models, and one can make different assumptions as to what the ground conditions are in particular, which will make a dramatic difference in whether or not you assume the ground is reflective or whether it's somewhat absorptive with typical, I'll say, ground cover, or if there's thick forests. And so you can get a wide range in predictive levels.
Thank you. Mr. Bruach?
The one thing I would like to suggest is that while your modelings may be relatively accurate, you still have to model each turbine that you're actually going to use. In the case of the Sheffield project, if you recall, the Clipper turbine model was changed, and there was no subsequent modeling. As I understand it, in the Lowell project, the Vestas turbine noise signature was modeled, and then the turbine blades themselves were changed, and there was no subsequent modeling done. So it's a matter of asking a model to do something that's it's not designed for.
Yeah, I think all of us would be in total agreement. If you change the turbine model and you're changing the noise specs, you're changing the input, that model is not worth relying on.
Thank you.
Am I wrong too? I mean, maybe it's just my telecom background, but we model constantly. Mostly we're modeling for cost and what's it going to cost to get where we want to go, whether it's broadband or whatever. But at the end of the day, the model is just designed to tell you what the best experts and the best number crunchers in our situation are predicting will happen. Really, at the end of the day, aren't you really going to best be served by taking a look and seeing what's really there on the ground, and those indicating the independent testing maybe on a continuous basis to get some understanding as to whether the modeling's really working? Isn't there something to be said for that?
Absolutely. I just think that the distinction is where the project is. Clearly, if the project is on the ground, put up a microphone and try to quantify it. If you're having troubles with ambient conditions or poor quality data or inability to do those measurements, then maybe you can go back to the model. But when you're in the permitting stage, there's no project to go measure, and that's where everything falls onto the model.
You can also, perhaps, and I know this is done in Canada and it's done elsewhere, you can also do a hybrid approach, which is you verify the model input by taking measurements close to the turbine. So, and this is done in other regulatory regimes as well. So the model is more or less set. What goes in, the modeling calculation is more or less set and agreed to in the regulation. What you're doing in your compliance checking is confirming the inputs. Is the turbine performing as specified? And that's more easily done. It's a routine test. There's standardized methods for it. It's industry practice, and you're not breaking new ground.
On that?
Yeah, sure.
You know, something like what he's described, I think, would be useful in some of the cases that you found very challenging, and that the department has found very challenging. For example, in the Sheffield case near the interstate, where if you made measurements between the home and the turbines and got some valid data there, because the problem is it's right next to an interstate, his home is, and so it's got a lot of contaminated data. And so your methodology, your hybrid methodology, would be a good approach to looking at the noise levels where you have problems getting the background separated out.
That's been in the regulations in Alberta, where if you have trouble getting quality data near the dwelling, you can do the close-up measurements, and like I had in my presentation and marked it as well, the IEC type sound power verification. That's also the case in a lot of Europe, where the noise limits make the viability of non-contaminated data low, so they rely more heavily on sound power verification of the source.
And not just sound, but I would go one step farther.
Or even intermediary,
yeah.
Absolutely, intermediary locations. And so there you're really doing a model validation.
Yes.
Where you pick a spot where, let's say, the model is supposed to do 49, 52, something of that nature. The only caveat that I'll add is that your angle of attack or your angle of view of the turbine is going to affect the characteristics and the propagation phenomena.
It would be nice to get several.
Yeah.
I think I'd also just add that I disagree a little bit with Payam's on that the value of the on-off measurements. I think on-off measurements can be indicative, but there's still a lot of challenges with trying to do on and off. There's challenges in terms of trying to schedule them. There's challenges in terms of, was the turbine really completely off? Did it really come completely back on? And then if you just look at a background noise signal, a background ambient signal, without any turbines on, it's constantly changing. And so you've got to take into account wind shear, wind veer, all these other statistics and wind. You know, the wind. We think of wind as miles per hour, but it's a complex flow field, and that is changing constantly. So it's hard to get identical conditions before and on and off. So it can be indicative, but it's certainly, I don't think, a panacea or a simple solution.
Yeah, I'm actually.
Back here, you have a question, but you want it? Yes.
I'm sorry.
Can you stand up?
I don't have
My name's
Identify yourself.
April Hensel, and I've worked for Act 250 for the last 30 years, and I've been reading noise studies for the last 30 years. And one of the things, your process is very different, but I'm here today to learn some more about the things that you're struggling with, that we're struggling with as well. And one of the things that's been an issue for us has been the reliance on the developer's noise study and our adversarial system The only time we're really able to pick it apart in any good way is when we have a very well-funded, well-heeled group who can actually hire an acoustical engineer. And my experience in reading noise studies is that they are unfortunately biased because they're being paid for by the developer, and they're biased in subtle ways because of the inputs. You know, if you put in more trees than are really there, or if you assume atmospheric conditions that aren't really there. And what happens when we review noise studies, the model gets changed radically throughout the course of the hearing because of incorrect assumptions. And it's a tortured review because you keep trying to pull out what are the incorrect assumptions that were put into the model to begin with. And I would hope whatever you guys can do with your review of this in terms of it being in the public good of the state of Vermont is to come up with a system that allows for, and I've wanted this and I've said this in our own, we need a state person who is expert in CAD, who can look at these noise studies and pull them apart, get into the data, have all of the data available to them, so we're not relying on the adversary process to figure out, is this correct or is this not correct? And I would really love to see an independent state employee responsible for evaluating noise studies for you, for us, for AOT, and to have that ability. And also to have, when you're going out to look at, are they complying, also to have somebody independent. And I think particularly when you're dealing with the public good, that would be a great thing to do. And I've read everything on the website because I'm also involved in a work group for the board of looking at our noise standards, a working group, and we're meeting later this week via teleconference, because standards are an issue, modeling is an issue, compliance is an issue, but I think critical to it is the independence and having someone within state government, if you could, or paid for by state government, an outside person who is independent, rather than the tortured process that we're going through now.
In our process, the Department of Public Service is supposed to do that, and they've got a couple experts here who are working for them. So that's how it works.
Are they familiar enough with the CAD and want to pull it apart?
I don't know about.
Well,
but the real question is.
Now you're making us experts, and I'm not sure we're quite there yet. That's why we have.
I'm just saying that as far as the role you're talking about, it exists. Whether they're doing a good job, I'm not here to say. One thing, I'm not saying they're doing a bad job, I just don't think it's not appropriate for us to opine on that today.
Right, okay.
One thing that we have heard today, though, and we do, that these workshops are for us as well. I mean, really, they're for us as much as for you. As we look at it, one of the things I heard, and we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but is maybe a process whereby, if not the neighbors get to pick the expert or the developer gets to pick the expert, at least some sort of a process where they have a collaborative effort to choose one, that there's something that would give, we heard that today. I mean, we heard that from some of the experts, we heard it from you and your questions. I mean, we understand that that's a concern.
I think I'll follow up a little bit on Les's comment too. I think what it comes down to is agreeing on the set of inputs and agreeing on the modeling parameters. And there are a number of jurisdictions that have established best practice guides that specify specifically what is to be modeled and how. Denmark has done so, the Netherlands has done so, the UK best practices guides all tell you exactly how to model it.
Any state jurisdiction?
No state jurisdiction. Ontario? Yeah, Ontario does it. Oregon has an approach, but it's not codified. But if you've got that, then if I run the model, he runs the model, you run the model, we can figure out how to get CAD online, and anybody can run the model. You put those same inputs in, you get the same numbers, because it's a simple calculation that anybody can do. I think it comes down to agreeing on what those relevant parameters are and getting that decided.
Yeah.
Melody McLean, I have a burning question about the modeling. Do you, when you consider your predictions and modeling, do you take into consideration the moisture in the air, wind direction towards a home? Is that in the equation anywhere?
Yeah, so the modeling standard is the ISO 9613-2, which WCAT uses. It has provisions for modeling under various moisture conditions, humidity conditions, temperatures, and the standard purports to give you the result for a downwind, moderate downwind condition. So if in the model you have 10 turbines and 5 houses, for each of those houses, when it calculates the contribution from each turbine, it assumes that the weather conditions are moderately downwind from the turbine to the house in question. And so if we're in a regulatory environment where conditions are set, you could pick, for example, the worst case humidity condition that has to be modeled, or the specific ground conditions that have to be modeled. But the model does have provisions in there for those variations.
And for wind conditions, wind direction towards the homes? Because when you look at the modeling maps,
yes, it assumes
it's like 10, 20, 30, it's same
exactly
all around.
It's
not.
No, the reason is it assumes that the wind is going in all directions from the turbine, from each turbine at the same time. So it's excuse me, trying to be conservative in that manner. That's why it ends up. CADNA does give you the option of doing one or the other, but that invariably ends up with some receptors actually being lower, because you're not assuming that they're downwind of all, you're assuming that they're downwind of just some.
Right. Okay, thank you.
The bullseye ends up being the conservative scenario. If you took wind speed and wind direction into consideration, it would tend to shift the contours in
one direction.
Yeah, they would just kind of skew out.
It's still all wrong in the end. Just ask the neighbors.
We've got a couple more hands. We got the work plan too we got to deal with here. So why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Robin Clark from Lowell. I have a question pertaining to continuous monitoring. We're hoping to have continuous monitoring in Lowell, I believe up to a year, if possible. It seems as though when there's no monitoring, production goes up, noise goes up. So when the turbines are producing more, are they noisier?
The output of the turbine from a noise perspective, from just about every turbine, is related to the power output to a certain degree. So typically, if they are pitch controlled and the RPM can change with that. Variable speed. Sorry. If they're variable speed and pitch controlled, they are able to ramp up to their maximum sound power and maximum electrical power. Once that happens, then the noise becomes constant as long as you're close to or at that maximum.
But you max, just to clarify, you max out on sound power before you max out on sound power, on energy.
Energy power, yes.
So if you have a 2 megawatt turbine, you will hit your, say, maximum sound emission at 1.2 megawatts. And from 1.2 megawatts to 2 megawatts, there's no change in sound. Sometimes it actually goes down.
What about a 3 megawatt?
It depends on the turbine.
The guy in the way back standing up.
My name is Sandy Ryder. I'm a physician in the Northeast Kingdom here. And I just like to ask the board to seriously consider infrasound. And from what I've heard from the experts, I've heard very little about it, and mostly in a discounting fashion. But I can say that the people I've spoken to, particularly the person I testified about in front of the Senate last year, was severely affected by a wind turbine and never heard a thing. And there's also a study in the Vermont study where people had to spend nights in a tent rather than their house, and then they couldn't hear the sound. So I really, just because it doesn't vibrate dust on a windowsill doesn't mean it's not a factor. So I would hope you know that.
Yes, sir.
Kim Freed from Newark. Did I hear the board mention that you're going to have a separate workshop on health?
We're going to talk some more about workshops in a minute once we finish the questioning.
Okay, and the second half of my question is for the board. We've heard that Ontario Health Canada is doing an extensive study. Are any of you familiar with that? And are you looking forward to the results of that study, or do you know what the status of that study is?
As far as I know, the Health Canada study, which is a federal study, has wrapped up most of the measurements, and they're going through analysis. They haven't released any indication on what the findings will be, but we are expecting the findings to be released probably by the end of this year.
Yes, sir.
Just curious, is there anybody here in the room today that's from Vermont Department of Public Health?
Yes.
And they wanted to present today, but we're going to talk about health impacts in another separate workshop.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name is Fred Person. The underlying intention, I believe, of the Public Service Board and everybody that's here is to find a common ground with the intention that we preserve the quality of life of people in Vermont that live in the rural areas, because we are the people that are affected. I don't have a wind tower in my backyard, and I don't really want one, because I just have all I got to do is listen to the effects of the people that are living close to it, and the quality of life seems to deteriorate. And it just seems like they have very little power in the process, and I'm hoping that this will open that up to make it more of an even playing field. I know it sounds like an unimaginable event, but I think that that's what has to be started here, and I just want to put that out so people are aware of it, that it's gonna, I would like to see that, and I hope that in the future we have a more equal playing field for the citizens that vote for people to come in and have the equality of levelness of the decision. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
I think we need to, do you have a question?
I do have a question. I don't believe I heard anybody mention the sound characteristic associated with amplitude modulation. And so quickly, if you tell me whether that is an issue related to turbines and whether it can be dealt with, or how it should be dealt with.
So the best source of information for that is a recent study that was published by Renewable UK, where they look at the level of amplitude modulation from a turbine, and essentially they're trying to quantify the individual swishes that go by and the difference in level from each individual swish. There are levels of ordinary amplitude modulation and some other amplitude modulation that they're trying to address. They've also done listening tests where people rate the amount of amplitude modulation of a typical sound with compared to a sound that doesn't have that amplitude modulation. So that is current work that has recently been released by Renewable Energy UK.
Thank you.
Okay, we're running out of time, and we have two more agenda items that we haven't gotten to, and we're not going to do them today, and my staff, I think, has a suggestion for how we want to handle those.
Yeah, again, this is subject to the board's consideration, but we tried to use these experts today for as long as we could, because it's hard to get all these experts together at one place. So the next workshop will be in Morrisville on the 13th of May at 7 p.m. That's a chance for citizens and adjoining landowners and folks in affected town officials to talk about your experiences and your recommendations. I'm going to suggest that we then have a third workshop that will really have a focus on health impacts associated with energy facilities, and we'll at that point decide whether we want to get more information in terms of peer-reviewed studies to determine what the state of the science is right now. So basically, the item we were going to discuss at 4 o'clock, we'll put that off to a future workshop. And I know the Department of Health and the Department of Public Service will want to provide information on health impacts, and other folks do the same. And then finally, the work plan, that we can talk about that work plan at that third workshop also. It's a very draft plan, and it really is very inclusive. But we'd like to know whether we're missing something. We can talk about that at that third workshop.
Does anybody have a problem with that, with what we're proposing? Ms. Smith?
Annette Smith. I don't have a problem with what you're proposing, but I do have one comment that I think has kind of been left out of this, and I think that we need to add to the agenda a discussion about doing a health survey around the three mountains where the projects are already built. And I also wonder if you are going to invite us to comment on the presentations that we heard today, and can we submit comments to you on that in the docket?
Sure. I'd be happy to have people submit comments on what we heard today, including comments on the work plan and on anything you want to, and as far as suggestions for what you'd like us to take up. And we can discuss those at the third workshop.
Date to be determined.
Yeah, the date has to be determined. But the second workshop is going to be focused on comments and recommendations from neighbors and host-affected town officials regarding their experience with sound. It's for those people. It's not for people who aren't currently within the view and sound shed of the turbines. Others are welcome to come, but we want to hear from those people. Yes.
Could you speak to how you envision the format? Because you had presentations today. You asked people in advance to present proposals. It's hard to get the public to come out to something like this. And if we know what your format is, it will be easier. Can they just show up? Or are they going to be expected to stand at a microphone and speak?
I was thinking of it as like a public hearing where you'd sign up, everybody would sign up who wants to speak, and we would listen, we would take people in order. But we're all open to suggestions if you don't think that's a good way to do it.
Let me think about it, and I'll offer comments in writing.
Right.
It may be a combination of the two. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what they have. Some of them may want experts. Some of them may have tax experts, what they've picked up, dollars and cents as well. I don't know. I can't tell because we don't know who's going to sign up and who wants to speak. So it'll be difficult, Ms. Smith, till we see what we've got there as to how it's
I guess that raises the question, are you going to ask people to sign up in advance of the workshop, or is it just whoever shows up?
I think it's whoever shows up.
Okay.
And then, I mean, I think we'll try to, if there's, depending on how many people show up and want to speak, we'll have to sort of figure out, well, how we're going to do this. And we're going to give people a limited amount of time if there's a lot of them. On the other hand, if we'd like to be sure we hear from everybody and make sure we hear from the people who are most affected. So.
And it's also including recommendations from those folks that have been affected.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Will slides from today's presentation be made available?
Sir.
Eddie Duncan, RSG. Will slides from today's presentation be made available?
Yes. Put them up. We have a special website page, and we'll put these presentations up on that site.
I just had a really quick question. I have not been able to get answered since this has started, and it's a question from all of the neighbors. Are the results of this investigation in the end going to benefit the existing project neighbors at all, or is it just for the future projects?
I think it depends on what we get. I think it depends on what we get.
It sort of depends. I mean, part of the problem here is the existing projects were granted approval through a litigated process, through a contested case process. They have rights. And to change and they've spent a lot of money relying on those approvals and put up these new projects. So there's laws that govern what we have.
Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Due to the general counsel of the board. The question is well taken, and I'm sure you have had difficulty getting the answer. The question is not easily answered. I know that's not satisfying to you, but there are so many different perspectives and different interests that have to be balanced. What can be done in this investigation is to tee up a conversation. One of the items of that conversation is what is the need, if any, to look back? What is the need, if any, to change things going forward? This board has an open mind and does not know. That's why they're here to hear from you. So the best we can do is to ask you to continue to participate in the process, but I would ask you not to press the board members to give you what effectively is a legal conclusion. And this is not an appropriate forum for them to do that in. If you'd like to speak with me more about that afterwards, I'd be happy to stay back and do that. Mr. Chairman?
Yes, part of the problem is we don't know what kinds of cases may come in front of us, and we really can't comment on cases that may be in front of us. And certainly the existing projects are potentially something that could come in front of us. So that's probably why we really can't talk about the specifics of those. So the focus of this is more on, are the standards that we're using today good ones, and should we keep using them, or should we change them? That's pretty much what this is about. If we decide to change them, then I guess we might think, well, now what? Yeah. Okay.
Our general counsel is telling us not to go farther because we're dealing with cases that are already litigated and there's been a final determination. That's what she's trying to get across to you. I will tell you, though, that in fact we are listening to what we're hearing, and that we're getting. Okay, so it's not like we don't hear what you're saying. We're having these workshops, so we do hear.
The ice is going out.
Our ears are open.
Okay, so I guess we'll send out an announcement for the next workshop once we get that.
Oh, the next one's the 13th.
No, I mean the one after that, for the third one.
Right. Third one?
Yeah. Right, I really appreciate everybody coming out today. I really appreciate the participation of our experts and all the people who ask questions and comments.